YouTube. Hi, everyone. My name is DJ Miles. Christian, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm well. Thank you, man. Let's do some Game of Thrones.
Let's talk about Game of Thrones. And, of course, before we talk about it, if you guys haven't seen this before, go ahead and hit that like button. All those likes help us out in the world and help out the Double Toasted channel. So we're continuously growing. And go ahead and just hit that like, hit that subscribe. And now let's go ahead and talk about Game of Thrones.
I was very sad that I wasn't here because I love season 4 a bunch. And the question that I want to kind of pose here, and I know everyone has already done that, but let's dive deeply into it, okay? Game of Thrones for 3 seasons was perfect. 4th season, I love it. I realize it has some imperfections, right? But season 5 for me, like, is this it? Is this where it kind of stops being the show proper? You know what I mean? Where it constantly subverted your expectations and constantly did these things? Because for me, it is. And what's sad about that is at the same time, and we'll go through it here in a moment, some of the highest highs of the show, like some amazing sequences happening in the season, but they don't coalesce the same way that season 3 did, where it's a fucking masterpiece. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up and everyone kind of be ready to talk about it. Like, what is different about this season compared to the previous seasons? And with that, go ahead.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and now talk about the beginning of season 5. We see a flashback with young Cersei here. And we get this Maggy the Frog prediction, right? Cersei ends up approaching her, and she's like, hey, you know what? I've been told that you can tell my predictions, and what are they? And she pretty much says, you know, what is it? Your king or your children will wear the crowns, and they'll also cry their shrouds or something like that. I don't know. I'm butchering the whole thing, but you pretty much get it, right? And she predicted everything correctly, right, Christian? That, hey, yeah, the king will have 16 kids, but you will only have 3, right? So on and so forth. And it pretty much led now to this interesting dynamic of like, okay, not only, again, have we been dealing with the mysticism and, you know, fantastical elements of, you know, Game of Thrones, but now we have someone who pretty much is telling Cersei's prediction, you know, note by note here and what's going to happen with their children. You know, Joffrey is gone. From the last season, we end up finding out, spoilers, in season 5, Marcella ends up getting the can, and then Tommen will eventually, we'll get to him come season 6, but everything is happening for Cersei in the way that she did not want it to.
This is a scene that sort of recontextualizes Cersei as a character. You realize she's still a righteous asshole, like she's terrible, but you understand her, don't you? Like, for the first time, you really kind of see her playing, and you realize that, like, she was always, like, this is this thing she heard when she was a kid. You know what I mean? Like, think about if someone told you straight up what was going to happen to you for the rest of your life, and then those things started to come, like, to fruition. Wouldn't that fucking horrify you? And I think that's the thing. It's like Cersei's operating on this, like, level of, like, now, especially now, right after the events of season 4 and Joffrey's gone, she's just like, we got to do anything we can to protect the other kids. Like, that's the most important thing for her. I think it's a great way to start the season for sure.
So I got here in episode 1, The Wars to Come. After that whole Maggy the Frog prediction and Cersei flashback, we get Varys and Tyrion talking because last time we saw them, they were in King's Landing. And now they're saying, hey, listen, Tyrion, if there's someone I think you should kind of lead your counsel to and advice, it should be Daenerys because, you know, she's doing big things, right? You know, we see Robin at the Vale, just doesn't know what he's doing. He's clueless as ever. But we also do get the introductions of the High Sparrow and all that stuff, and, you know, how they're just kind of these religious fanatics. And we haven't really seen a lot of things with religion I was going to say a personal aspect, right? We've been hearing about all these gods, the drowned gods, the old gods, the new gods, the fire gods, but we actually never just seen someone, a person, just kind of leading what the god has to say, right? And that's who the High Sparrow is.
Or like in a governmental fashion, right?
There
like
we go.
The thing. Yeah, the Lord of the Light's doing this, but that motherfucker isn't legislating laws, right? But no, the High Sparrow gets to, like, run shit, and no one is safe.
So then we go all the way back to Castle Black. Jon is pleading with Mance Rayder to throw your pride away and just bend the knee, damn it, because Stannis just needs the wildlings to, again, also just add to his large army to take over, you know, Winterfell because, you know, winter's coming. And, you know, of course, Roose being Warden of the North is just something we don't want to happen. But of course, Mance is too prideful, Christian. And then, of course, we see as he's burning alive, which is not any way any honorable man should go out, right? Because you don't want to go out being a bitch and just yelling, right? So Jon does a good thing. He throws an arrow to his heart. He ends up dying that way. And then, of course, that's the end of episode 1. And then we see the beginning of Arya going into the House of Black and White. And Christian, I know we are going to be talking about this throughout this review here, but I just feel like the House of Black and White was just a huge missed opportunity with a lot of things being kind of empty.
This is one of those things where I guess we like to see Arya kind of finally advance into the person that she sort of promised that she would be in season 1, right? Like, yo, you'll marry a lord and you'll have lands. And she's like, that's not for me. And so it's great that you see the slow transformation of her doing that. A little disappointed, man, right? Because season 5, you get, Jock and Hagar comes back and you get like a lot of like relationships and cool things that are happening, but it never feels like this grand mystical place in the way that some of the other locales have. It's not bad. I don't want to say that it's bad at all. It's just that, like, considering what that was supposed to be, it felt flat. This is the season of arcs that kind of don't work, right? Like, there's another arc we'll talk about briefly, but this starts here. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And let's talk about one of those main arcs, and that is everything happening with Dorne. So, man, Dorne was something hyped for the longest time. I remember when this season was coming because Dorne, just like every other part of Westeros, there's just so much land and coverage to talk about in Game of Thrones. So now, Christian, when you have to pretty much introduce like this new whole region of Westeros over here, how are we going to do it, and how's Benioff and Weiss going to do this proper? And we end up finding out not so much. All we know is in these early seasons that Jaime and Bronn, they're sent on a rescue mission to get Marcella back, but it is pretty cool seeing Prince Doran here, who is the main guy who runs Dorne. And listen, it's very cool that we end up finding out that I love my brother, but you know what? He died in a trial by combat, and that's, hey, as much as I want to get revenge, he died the proper way through the justice system.
That's the law. Absolutely,
yeah.
Man.
So you can't be angry, although, and that's one of the infuriating things. I'm not going to say this is why season 5 sucked in regards to Dorne, but just seeing how unreasonable Oberyn's wife was, where it's like, oh, but you don't want to get revenge? And like, he's like, he died through law. What do you want me to do? Start a war because we didn't get the results that we wanted? Just get the hell out of here with it. Let's go ahead and just skim through episodes 2 and 3, The House of Black and White and The High Sparrows, since we're talking about it. We end up finding out that Jon Snow now finally becomes the Lord Commander. And of course, one of the guys from King's Landing, this guy who's about to get beheaded, he ends up dying because he doesn't respect Jon, and he's like, Jon, you're a bitch. And this is something really important for Jon to understand, where he's like, listen, I need to become a man. We finally see now one wedding actually come to fruition and everything working out peacefully, at least for a little bit. Tommen and Marjorie finally get married. It's good to see Marjorie finally become the queen that she wants to, that she's been yearning for all throughout these seasons of Game of Thrones. And we finally see her winning at some point where, Cersei comes in and is like, hey, is there anything I can do for you? And she's like, nah, that's okay, but I'm going to keep on having sex with Tommen because, he's kind of making me tired, right? And Cersei, of course, is angry because the Queen Regent, Christian, cannot do anything about this, and that gets her really angry. And because of that, she ends up talking to Jonathan Pryce here, right? And she's trying to figure out, how can I get this man to be in a position of power and all that? And I think it was through Tommen just writing some like decree, right? That now, hey, he can be in power because the original High Septon was complaining about stuff, but he was also just as corrupt and was not getting a lot of things right with religion in Westeros anyway. So when Cersei's like, hey, we got this religious fanatic that might set things straight, let's go ahead and do it. But we, of course, end up finding out that doesn't work for her in the later seasons. What's happening with Sansa and Littlefinger? We end up finding out that, hey, guess what? Littlefinger has this plan, Christian, to send Sansa to Winterfell to marry off to Ramsay because there always has to be a Stark in Winterfell. And hey, don't worry, Sansa, this is just going to be temporary because, we got the Lord of the Vales who's going to come, who hasn't participated in the War of the Five Kings at all, that's going to come and save you. If if the Baratheons don't do it first.
I believe in that scene when Littlefinger is like, he breaks the news, like, hey, we're going to make you go marry off with Ramsay. He kind of, again, implores her to understand how the game is played, right? And briefly in this season, you're like, oh, yeah, Sansa knows what's up. Like, she's gonna learn how to do this. And it just goes nowhere. It's like rudderless, because they'll have her kind of grow and do these really big things, and then only for her to kind of regress when it's necessary to the story. And to have character progress and only to walk it back makes you feel like this isn't the show that it once was, because people would either grow and that would be to their detriment, right, or they would grow and they would overcome. It was always like a one or the other. It wasn't like, oh shit, we got to go back because she needs to be like a helpless teenager who doesn't know how to play the game. And so that really kind of irked me, man.
So let's go ahead and now jump back all the way to Dorne. Jaime and Bronn are on their way to rescue Marcella. We see the introductions of the Sand Snakes, and we see that, Christian, all of them are a little bit feisty. We also see more things happening back at King's Landing, Christian, where Tommen is just, oh man. Listen, it's one thing for everyone to hate Joffrey and for everyone to hate Ramsay because we at least know what kind of a villains they are, right? But the reason why I hate Tommen, and this is not why I don't think season 5 is bad, it's just more so like, oh, I think I just hate Tommen as a character. He's just so indecisive, man. His queen ends up getting captured. Cersei ends up getting captured eventually. And what does Tommen do? Well, I don't want there to be bloodshed amongst, between my Knights Guard and, this new religious faction that's kind of taken over. So let me just kind of figure it out alone and just not eat and just sort of maybe eventually figure it out. Actually, no, I just don't even have a spine to think about.
I was going to defend him by saying he's 12, but I'm pretty sure they retconned his age, right? Like, that's the whole point. So isn't he supposed to be around 18 at this point when they actually marry him off in season 5?
Oh,
because then you're like, yeah, you're old enough to know. Robb Stark is like 16 when he's fighting the Lannisters. You know what I mean? So like, if you're going by just how much time is supposed to pass, I think he's like 12 years old. And it's the same thing I always say about Sansa. It's like, Sansa's a child. Like, we know that she is older, the actress and shit, right? But she's a child who is learning how to do this. And when you're a kid, you're susceptible and stuff like that.
Now, I know we weren't talking about much happening in Marine or anything with Dany right now, but we see Barristan Selmy finally get the can. And who would have thought, because he was one of the biggest badasses that we've known all throughout the show, and how they just kind of talked about him in just not flashbacks, but just through memories time, where they're like, hey, even during Robert's Rebellion, Ned Stark and, Barristan Selmy would talk, and they're like, hey, I'm glad I didn't find you in the, in the battles way back when, because it would have been hard for me. I don't know who would have won. So to see him kind of go out from a bunch of thugs from the Sons of the Harpy was also just a huge misstep to me. I'm like, hold on. How do you have this one guy, and again, we've never seen him fight up until that moment, where it's like, hey, he took out 10 of the Harpies, Christian, but he still ended up dying from a bunch of thugs, essentially, right? I mean, it's not even known that the Sons of the Harpies are like these group of assassins. It's just like, well, they're just a bunch of random people rebellion because they don't like Cersei kind of ruling Marine. We see here that Aemon finally ends up dying, but not before he says egg, 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 which is just a huge, cool Easter egg to people who know the story of Dunk and Egg, which is something that they briefly mentioned throughout the show, but not so much. So for the book readers, I thought that was awesome. And then again, we have one of the signature things he says here: kill the boy and let the man be born. And Christian, he's talking about Jon Snow here. Again, just stepping up to that leadership role. And it's very important, again, because although now there's this decision of, okay, let me go ahead and grab all the wildlings that I can from Hardhome to come fight for us, because if not, they're going to become, a huge problem to deal with the Night King coming, marching on. Let's go ahead and rescue these people. And of course, Tormund ends up telling him, Jon, well, if this is going to work, I don't want you to betray me again because I don't trust you right now. Come with us, right? And we'll see how that happens later on. Of course, we see the most awkward family dinner scene between Sansa and the Boltons. Not to mention, now we end up finding out that, Reek has been Well, he admits to burning the Stark children, but ends up telling Sansa a little bit later on throughout the season. That never ended up happening. By the end of episode 5 here, Tyrion and Jorah ends up talking because Jorah's going to take Tyrion to Dany, and then we see the old Valyria, right, which is the oldest civilization before the Targaryens ended up ruling, all the Valyrians, they had all the dragons. They had, pretty much their technology up to date, as much as it can. And we see the ruins. And of course, through that, there's all these like wise tales and these superstitions of like stone men and all that stuff. And we see for the first time, Christian, that Tyrion now acknowledges a dragon and he looks at it. And I thought that whole scene was done beautifully. And you're like, holy crap. Okay, maybe I should, give this Daenerys person, 2 minutes of my time. But not only that, we do see some stone men, and of course, don't touch them, Christian, because if you touch them, you'll become, you'll lose your own, psyche in the process. So, do you want to go ahead and talk about this for a second?
Yeah, I really like that. And this is something that we've sort of heard of. Two things. We've heard of Valyria a bunch, right? And we know it's this ghost town, that something cataclysmic happened and no one really lives there except for these people who are just out, the stone men, which is really interesting. We also saw that with, and I always butcher her name, Stannis' daughter. Is it Shireen?
Shireen, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So with her, it's really interesting because that is like something we've already been introduced to. We know that she has this affliction, and Stannis got every Meister in the world, and he doesn't know exactly how he did it, some combination cocktail of different treatments, but it was able to stop the grayscale in its tracks, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it was interesting to get, that's our only exposure to it up until this point, and then we get to see oh no, this is what else happens. And it also kind of gives import to Jorah's storyline from here on out, because we get a ticking time clock, we get a stopwatch, and so they're whenever people kind of know that they're going to die, they can act accordingly. They can make their plans and so on and so forth. So I actually really love this scene. And again, there's certain individual arcs that are wonderful in season 5. And this is probably one of the stronger ones.
Yeah, definitely. So let's go ahead and go into episode 6. Arya now learns to lie, and she sees the many faces. So one of the very cool things they end up showing off in this season, and I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to see what they do with it. And again, well, unfortunately, not a lot happening, but I think it's cool, right? We get more of this religious stuff where it's like, hey, there's only one God, and it's the many-faced God, and this is what we do to these bodies, and that's why we keep on washing them, etc., etc. And then this is also the episode now that Marjorie is fully arrested, right? And Olenna is not having it, so she ends up trying to talk with Littlefinger and, the High Sparrow himself, and just like, listen, what the hell do you want, right? Do you want money? Is it power? Is there something you're looking out for? And just like this relationship that Batman and the Joker has, sometimes people just want to see the world burn, but according to the High Sparrow, Christian, hey, you know what? I just want to do what's just by God, right? And this is why, your granddaughter is in jail, and this is why, your grandson is in jail. And according to what is proper and just, they're going to get their own thing. And this is the first time we see Olenna where, hey, she respected Tywin, but he was a force to be reckoned with. There was nothing the High Sparrow wanted out of this little exchange they had. And this is the first time where Olenna was just downright angry. And because of that, we also see, well, it got to Cersei thinking, hey, nothing's going to happen to me, right? And this is a huge twist, which I liked, where I didn't see it coming anyway. Hey, Cersei gave the High Sparrow power. Well, he's not going to discriminate. Cersei, you've been known for a lot of shit, and I'm going to take you away. And of course, we see Cersei being taken away. And of course, episode 6 ends with, Sansa over here, and now we can finally kind of talk about it, Christian. Hey, she finally gets married. Her and Ramsay are about to get it on, and of course, before it happens, Ramsay ends up telling Reek, hey, go ahead and watch. And of course, this is just one of those controversies I remember a lot of people talking about, where it's like, was this a rape scene? Was this not a rape scene? But even besides that, why was this happening here? We saw Sansa at the end of season 4 in this position of like, now she knows how to play the game, but now we kind of see her back in this like torturous situation, right? Where it's like, okay, now she's just back on ground zero when she was kind of put in this position to do good. And this isn't now about Sansa. Now this is like this weird character arc for Theon. But why did Theon even need this character arc to begin with? Because it undermines Sansa. And it just kind of goes back to like writing Sansa back into this like helpless character, which does not go well for a lot of people.
No, listen, you nailed it. There's two cardinal sins, which again is don't progress a character to only have them regress because the plot needs it. That's bad writing. And that's something that the show mostly avoided for the entirety of its run up until now. The other large problem is like, listen, you know, like when women would get mad, like Mario, Super Mario, think about this. What's the premise of Mario? Like, oh, Princess Peach gets kidnapped and Mario's got to go get her, right? The damsel in distress thing is not new to storytelling. But if you were a woman, maybe you'd get it a little bit more, right? Like, we're always just a prop for the man's journey. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's essentially what it kind of comes down to. The reason we like Zelda so much is Zelda's like a badass. Like, she doesn't need people, you know, in the early games maybe. But like when we grew up, we had like the N64, right? She was like chic. She was doing shit on her own. It was badass, right? Yeah. I'm bringing all that up just to say that the problem is this isn't even a situation of like, oh, Sansa got kidnapped and the whole story is about a male's arc. We have the most horrific thing that can happen to a woman happen. And I'm glad it happened off screen. Don't get me wrong. But instead of dealing with the repercussions of how that makes her feel in the moment, you're right. Tight up, closing up on Theon's face. How is Theon dealing with this? Oh, it's so bad for Theon. Go fuck yourself, man.
But I'll say this, although there has been a lot of missteps up until this point, the last 2 to 3 episodes definitely make up for it. So now let's go ahead and talk about episode 8, Hardhome. And before we get to the good stuff, hey, we see Tyrion and Dany over here now giving each other some advice, some stories, right? Let me tell you why one day, if I get drunk enough, why I ended up murdering my father. But this is why you need my advice and why I should give it to you and blah, blah, blah. And I believe in you. But can you stop this cycle of the wheel, right? Because Dany says, Christian, I'm going to break this wheel and there's only going to be one household. So how did you feel about that conversation?
Well, I liked it for a couple of reasons. I like when the world, like the Game of Thrones is such an expansive universe, right? That like early on, these stories were happening so separately from each other that it was hard to feel emotionally invested in a lot of Dany's arcs. But throughout the series, right, you've started to see the universe fold onto itself. Suddenly characters who are on opposite ends of the world are now meeting each other. And we also figure that like Dany probably has the most pure, you know, intentions, I guess, or the best claim to the throne. So we're rooting for her in a way because we saw her be a like child who was sold into sex slavery, basically assume agency and gather an army and gather the knowledge of how to play the game and to rule and all of this shit. So her story is very interesting and it's like meteoric, right? It's cool. And now we also know that Tyrion, based on how he defended the city in season 2, right? Battle of Blackwater, he is a fucking tactician. He knows how to strategize and stuff like that. And beyond that, like he loves to best these people that look down on him because of his short stature. Meanwhile, like this dude's doing mental gymnastics over them. So I loved this scene because you kind of got these two worlds coming together, but also think about it symbolically. This is a Lannister fucking hanging out with a Targaryen. It's a big deal. You know what I mean? And Tyrion has to sell himself as true of intention because why would you ever take a Lannister and knowing what we know about the Lannisters, right?
Yeah.
So it's a really powerful scene. I think it's good. And I think that anytime the world starts to fold in on itself, the show does get a little bit better because finally the relationships we're used to seeing are upended because we have new character dynamics that are being put together.
Listen, Hardhome was not the reason a lot of people talked about that. It was the reason that we saw Jon Snow doing some cool shit because, Christian, I don't know about you, but when I saw that, I'm like, oh, I thought he's going to die. He's going to die. And guess what? He ended up surviving that whole big clash right there. One of the coolest scenes out there. And also remembering here that it's not just Dragonstone that can kill these guys. It is also Valyrian steel. And we see it through that revelation right there. So let's go ahead and just kind of talk about Hardhome and everything happening beyond the wall with Jon Snow trying to capture all the wildlings.
Right. Dragon Glass, not Dragonstone.
Dragon Glass, my bad.
No, it's just important. I want to be people. I hear the fucking internet typing already, being like, actually. But yeah. So listen, Hardhome is one of the moments in the series where you could you know, we're used to the episode 9 of it all. Unless I'm wrong, Hardhome is episode 8.
Episode 8, correct? Yeah.
Okay. So we're used to that. I think that's why it fucked with us a little bit. I don't think anyone was prepared for how intense that was going to be. But beyond that, it's a show. Like that episode is comprised of so fewer scenes than most of the other episodes are, right? Like we're usually like, we're here. We're going to cut between 4 or 5 different locations. We're going to do that 2 or 3 times. This one does jump around, but like I believe the last 30 minutes are purely in Hardhome.
Correct.
Which is like, there's this idea of just escalating tension. I remember when we watched this live, I think I talked to you right afterwards. I called you and I'm like, do you want to know why that was such a brilliant scene? Because every time your like heart was pulsing and you're like, holy shit, they can't do anything to top this. They somehow upped the momentum. They upped the suspense.
And, you know, it starts off very kind of like the Red Wedding, where it's like your expectations are like, okay, seems like everything's going along pretty well. They're kind of negotiating with the Thens and the other wildlings, right? And Tormund does something funny where he like bashes in the Bone King or whatever his name was, and he's like, let's talk to the elders. It seemed like some people were going to make their peace, and even Tormund says it before the craziness happens. Listen, there's about 5,000 people here. It's only going to get worse for them. At least it's warm over there, you know. So let's just kind of go and pick up these other people later. And then of course we see the whole like avalanche scene and like, hey, what's happening? And then the gate is closed and then the momentum builds up. And yeah, I thought Jon Snow was going to die because I was already now programmed that, okay, if we're going to see one of our honorable and heroic heroes die, that was his sacrifice, right? Like I thought through his sacrifice, now they have to like, someone else has to kind of step up to that role and see what happens. So when, of course, you know, when that scene ended up happening, I was just screaming like, oh my God, he ended up surviving. But not, of course, before the episode ends where the Night King himself is like, sup, yeah, dude.
He's doing his fucking shrug emoji shit. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like, this was a good moment. I mean, but again, I told you why I particularly loved this. It's like, listen, like you escaped, right, Jon Snow? You were able to escape with your life. He could go after you right now. You realize that. Yeah. For me, what was scary about it, it was almost like Hitchcock's The Birds, right? It's like at the end, they don't even have to attack. This guy raises the dead and he's like, you can fucking run. I'll get you later. You know what I mean? It's the idea that we've already won in our minds, which is horrific.
We as the audience have been seeing all this stuff with the White Walkers and Winter's Coming, but this was the first time where they're like, oh shit.
We're here, dogs.
Yeah. We're fucking here. I don't know why everyone's still trying to claim that Iron Throne. And, you know, even up until this point with season 5, when they introduced the High Sparrow and all that, I'm like, who wants to live in King's Landing? Let's go ahead and now jump into the final 2 episodes here. A Dance with Dragons, and then, of course, Mother's Mercy, where, again, although a lot of missteps were happening in season 5, well, this was one of them, but not for the reasons that, you know, you and I might think, Christian. So Stannis, of course, now is Father of the Year, gives up Shireen, and we've seen a lot of stuff leading up to this moment where, listen, Stannis is cold and he's calculated, but he loves his daughter, and that is something we've seen all throughout this show with him, and he is not going to do anything. And, of course, we see one of those hard conversations where he ends up even talking to Shireen saying, hey, you know what? Sometimes I have to do something that I don't like, but it's because I was destined to do it. And then, of course, even seeing that whole scene play out. And Stannis' wife hates Shireen for the longest time, but it's not until you see and hear those horrific cries from Shireen as she's dying that the mother's like, whoa, okay, hold on. I actually do like my daughter. Can we please save her? Stannis, what are you doing? This is crazy. And I love how they even show just scenes of like Stannis' men and the sellswords looking at this like, oh man, what the fuck is happening? I do not approve Stannis the Manus. What the fuck? And of course he does it because he believes it is his right to that. So, Christian, how did you feel about all that playing out? Because that was one of the hard scenes to watch.
No, there's a couple things I want to say here. One, I think this scene should have ended the episode, and it doesn't. I think it kind of fucks with momentum. Yeah. Number 2, I think it's a little like it's a amazingly powerful scene. Do not get me wrong. I love that. It breaks my heart because think about what happens in the next fucking episode. All of this is essentially for naught. And it kind of disappoints you because, you know, like Stannis is like an asshole, but he's also operates in his own weird version of honor, as weird as that sounds. Okay. Yeah. And so it seemed very out of character. At the same time, you realize that he has to do that. That's the emotional depths of it. But I feel zero sympathy for that wife. I mean, yeah, fuck her. Like, she was totally on board until the screaming started, and then she wants to get cold feet. Like, nah, dude, that really fucking bothered me. That's the emotional climax of the episode. But instead, we end up going back to Dany, which is still a cool thing. Don't get me wrong, but it didn't have the same emotional punch to it.
No, definitely. I 1,000% agree with you. I mean, listen, we need to occupy, you know, Daenerys right now. It seems like a lot of her story arcs just throughout the season were just like, hey, she got her army, she got her dragons. Well, let's just kind of keep her here in the East. The whole Colosseum scene, how it plays out and, you know, what's done, I think is pretty awesome. I think it's pretty cool. But you're right. I think it would have been more of an emotional punch to end the episode with Stannis and the whole Shireen thing as opposed to, oh, Drogon coming in to save Dany. And now they can kind of acknowledge each other because we've seen this, that Dany had this the inner Targaryen, right? She wasn't burned alive at the end of season 1. And now we kind of see this like, not telepathic, but this communication that she has with her dragons because it's just a Targaryen thing, right? So right. I like how that's played out and how it's shown, but I've heard from the books, she was actually like flying in originally, not her eventually getting into Drogon and winning her trust. And the episode just ended with like Tyrion like saying like, wow, like that's the person I'm going to advise type of thing, right? And it's like, well, there's still a lot of chaos happening around the Colosseum with the Harpies, so are we just going to kind of end it right here? I guess
right,
so.
Like if I'm Tyrion or if I'm anyone else, I'm like, this fucking, she just left? Like, we're going to die. You know, that was my big beef with that whole scene. But it's fine, dude. It is what it is. Like, they needed to have Dany really assume, every season is an arc for Dany to assume her destiny a little bit more.
For sure.
Right? And when you think about season 1, she walks out of the flames. You're like, oh shit, mother of dragons. Nah, no, hold on. We got to go through a lot more fucking trial and error before she's actually that person.
So let's go ahead and just kind of see how everything all plays out. You're right. And this was, something else I also thought was really dumb before we see the end of Stannis. Ramsay and 20 of his men somehow destroyed all the food supply. A lot of horses were gone. A lot of sellswords said, fuck it, let's just leave. And Stannis is now put in a situation where he cannot win Christian. And of course, because of that, and Ramsay's 20 men, and the whole war ended up coming. There's that look where Stannis is like, oh, fuck it, let's just fight. He's not going to win. Brienne of Tarth is like, hey, what did you do to your brother? Was it you that casted this shadow version of yourself that ended up killing your brother? And he's like, yeah. And you know what? Go on with it. Kill me. And that's the end of Stannis. Unfortunately, we don't actually see him die. But now that I rewatch it, I'm like, yeah, Brienne was going to kill him.
Thematically, it wrapped up for sure. Because I remember originally you were like, I think he's still alive. And the reason, and I can't blame you, is like, listen, this is a show that will show you when someone's dead. Like, if they don't show it, don't trust it. With the exception of Sirio Farrell from season 1. That motherfucker died. But it was a bit disappointing because, again, we just saw this horrific thing happen the episode before that was supposed to give him something. And it's just like, man, you burned your daughter and then you died the next day and you died off screen. Yeah. It didn't work, man. That's what I'm saying. It's not that it's terrible. It's not terrible. It's just that it's not operating on the same level of success rate. And especially with someone like Stannis, who, again, a bastard for sure, but an engaging character, someone that you definitely like to keep seeing what was going on. He had a fucking arc. It just seemed like it kind of fell apart. And it wasn't very satisfying, man. And that kind of brings us to the finale.
And we see Arya finally get Meryn Trant and just murders him. One of the most gruesome deaths out there. I mean, not even for Game of Thrones. I'm just saying fucking in horror in general. I'm like, what the fuck is this? This is not even Mortal Kombat, dude. She did some Mortal Kombat fatality. And then, when the fatality ends in the game, it just there you go, character selection screen. No, they just showed Meryn Trant just suffering for a good 5 minutes, and I'm like, okay. Which I hate you, Game of Thrones, where it's I can never just enjoy the people I want to see die or get humiliated. It's I somehow still feel somewhat sympathetic for Meryn Trant when he went out the way he did. So Arya is now
children. Miles, let's not get too uppity about wanting to save him. I mean, he was literally fucking children, and he was a horrific person. So kind of deserved what he got.
Yeah. No, definitely. Okay, you know what I mean, guys. You guys know what I mean. Of course, hopping over to Dorne here. Well, everything's going to be happily ever after, right? Wrong. I guess Marcella ended up dying through poison because we find out from Oberyn's wife, which I'm forgetting her name. It's Ilaria, right? Ilaria Sand, I want to say.
Yeah, I think you got it.
Something like that. Yeah, she ended up kissing Marcella through the poison, all that stuff. And then, of course, I forgot to even mention one of the lines a lot of people hated in Season 5. It was when one of the Sand Snakes was like to Bronn, oh, you like bad girls and you need bad pussy. It's like, what? Like,
yeah, like let's be real. The problem with Dorne is that it's a like what 7 or 8 episode arc, I believe. Like they spend a lot of time in Dorne, or at least going to Dorne and so on and so forth. And it has like maybe story for 3 episodes. Mm-hmm. Like it's not worth what's going on. And literally the entire thing is reverse engineered just so Cersei can lose a kid.
Well, I mean, talk about a scene that I was all about and then I quickly just felt bad for is Cersei. So she finally ends up confessing Christian. Shame, shame, shame. We ended up hearing all that chanted throughout King's Landing and people just throwing shit at Cersei, throwing food at Cersei. She's crying. She feels bad. It's not necessarily hard to watch for me anyway, but you finally see it again just where, all right, we see someone we don't like kind of get it, and then you just still somehow feel a little bit sympathetic towards. But seeing this play out was pretty fascinating to see, hey, here's a character who pretty much have been laughing, who's pretty much been plot armor immune for the longest time. And then when we see it play out, it's like, no, she's a human too, right? Strip her away from, her bodyguard and just her house's name and all that. And she's just a simple woman, just like anyone else in King's Landing. So to kind of see her get her comeuppings, a lot of people liked it, but a lot of people also felt it hard to watch too when it played out. So how do you feel about that?
No, I mean, you're right. The comeuppance part of it's awesome. The problem, again, though, is like, how did we start this season? We started with a prophecy that basically explains why Cersei is the way she is. Also, remember that she was married off to some guy that she did not want to get married to, and there's a lot of other fucking things. She has an emotionally abusive father, whatever, okay? A lot of factors go into why she is the way she is. But the reason that this only works for like a couple minutes, and then you're right, you start to feel bad for her because it's like, this is a really bad season for her. It's about why she's so cold. It's about why she's so calculating and why she's so mistrustful of everybody. And so, yeah, by the end of it, you just feel really bad. Shout out to that bell ringer lady, though.
I know.
Shame? That lady?
Shame.
No, she does so much with so little. I think she says 4 words the entire season, and she's kind of the best part of it. Definitely memeable and shit, but... No, it's a really difficult scene to watch, and I remember even when she gets back to the Red Keep, she like kind of collapses down, and doesn't the mountain pick her up, right? Like
yeah, they Zombie Mountain.
Over and pick her up, and even in that fucking moment, man, she's like, "Oh, you motherfuckers are gonna pay."
Like when it happened, it's just like, "Oh my god, man, I'm gonna fuck you motherfuckers up." So get ready for that. But of course, we see the season end by Jon Snow pretty much getting murdered, right? So we thought, what's his name? Benjen Stark. There's something with Benjen Stark. He's actually alive. And of course, Jon Snow, when he comes out and he says, what, where? You see that little sign, Christian, that says traitor. And of course, Alistair Thorne's the first one, for the watch. And then everyone else saying for the watch. And of course, Ollie crying, saying, oh my God, for the watch. Ends up stabbing him. And although you and I aren't a fan of Ollie, right, it is disappointing from Jon's perspective and point of view, knowing that, like, hey, you know how Jiro Mormont taught me as not a squire, but pretty much like his assistant to be like, hey, this is how you learn. And if I can teach someone young about like morals and just kind of doing the right thing, I'm glad I can at least give my beliefs to someone else so they can actually learn the proper way to kind of rule and just kind of learn things in life, right, about the good and the bad. And although there's situations where you understand where Ollie's coming from, it's like, listen, we need the wildlings. Jon makes a very interesting case and a logical one too, a practical one, where it's like, we need these people because if not, they're going to be used in the army of the dead. And listen, I know you guys don't like each other, okay? Like, I get it. I get it. But it's the living versus the dead. I don't know how much more practical this can become. So and this is not a reason why I don't like season 5, but just a reason why I just don't like some of the men of the Night's Watch for being so ignorant. And I remember even watching this scene when it played out. I'm like, okay, listen, he didn't die in Hardhome, but this is where he dies. And I remember they just showed Jon like this, just kind of like, and I was like, is his eye gonna twitch? Is something gonna happen? Huh? Nope. I guess it's over. So that's how Jon dies, and that's how season 5 ends up finishing.
We need to dissuade people of the notion that the Night's Watch are somehow honorable people, because certainly some of them are. But again, think about who comprises this. People who are like going to face the axe, who instead of facing the axe were able to go live out the rest of their days at the wall in servitude. A lot of these people aren't the best human beings in the world. And so, but at least they still operated under the guise of being honorable. And this is the one time where you're like, nah, you motherfuckers really ain't honorable at all. Yeah, those first 3 seasons are like perfect. I would say they're 10 out of 10. Season 4, I'll give it like a 9 out of 10. I loved it. I get a little shitty on this one, man. This is like at best a 7 out of 10 season. Like, because there's so many logical inconsistencies with what's going on. Again, much better than Walking Dead, but that's just me. If you had to put a number on it, where are you going?
You know what? I like that number. 7 out of 10. I think that's a very fair number. Let me know, again, what all of you guys think was your favorite season. What did you think about season 5 ultimately? Did it take a lot of missteps? Do you agree with a lot of stuff that we said? Was there some stuff that we missed that, we glossed over that we should have talked about? Let me know in the comments down below. And once again, stay toasty, everyone.